Welcome back to Hello Nigeria. It's time for our Woman Wednesday. And today we're beaming the spotlight on someone who's done something really amazing. She's founded the first ever flying air medical services, referred to as flying doctors. Her name is Dr. Olamide Orekunrin. She was motivated to start this charity for reasons which we shall find out shortly. And she has about 20 aircraft and 44 doctors, so it's stated here. And she's undaunted by difficult challenges. She successfully established this in 2007. She's a member of both the American Academy of Aesthetic Surgeons and the British Medical Association. And she was listed among young global leaders by World Economic Forum in 2013. I'm speaking with none other than Dr. Olamide Orekunrin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Dr. Ola.
Speaking to you both.
Lovely.
My first question is this. Do you have a Nigerian national honor? Have you received one yet?
No, I haven't. But I'm not particularly enthusiastic about getting one. I'm more focused on trying to ensure that people across Nigeria and, in fact, across our sub-region, West Africa, can access healthcare more easily.
Now, while introducing you, I talked about your journey to founding Flying Doctors, which we'll get into shortly. But let's get to know Dr. Olamide. What was it like for you growing up?
So a lot of people don't know this about me, actually. I was born in England, and I grew up in a really rural, probably the most rural part of England, in East Anglia. I grew up in a small town there called Lowestoft. My husband went to school in Kano, so I always used to make fun of him, you know, when he kind of shells or makes a grammar error. I was always like, because you didn't benefit from a British education, that's why you're making these problems. But then he came to see my primary school, like with 3 buildings, like primary 1 and 2 in one room, primary 3 and 4 in one room, primary 5 and 6. He said, never make fun of me in your life again. That my school in Kano was far better than this. So it was quite interesting, a small community, but a really good community. Seaside community that I grew up in, so I didn't grow up in a big city.
Have you always wanted to be a doctor, or what were your childhood dreams?
Yeah, almost always as a child. I went for a period that I wanted to become a pilot, but I think my parents thought that was too dangerous, so I settled on medicine. Yeah,
but you're kind of like in both worlds now.
Yeah, so I still went back to my original passion somehow, which is something funny. And when we talk about like Nigerian parents and the way that they push people to either study medicine, law, or engineering, I think people always end up with the original passion. So I was passionate about flying and passionate about medicine, but they kind of steered me away from aviation a bit because obviously at that time there's still a lot of plane crashes. It was considered a dangerous profession, but somehow I found myself back in aviation anyway.
So now let's talk about you finding yourself in aviation. Which came first, medicine, aviation?
Medicine.
Medicine came first. All right, your journey through medicine, you studied obviously in the UK. How was it?
Interesting. And it would be an interesting perspective for young people in Nigeria especially, because I guess a lot of young people in Nigeria who were born and grew up in Nigeria, you know, whenever I drive past the American embassy or the UK embassy, everybody's looking for a visa. They want to leave because they feel that there are no opportunities in Nigeria. But for a lot of us that were born and raised in England and knew no different, we always used to see people coming from Nigeria as more like an elite. So, you know, I used to read about like companies, especially when I was in university, I used to read about like, you know, Nigerians who owned banks and airlines and, you know, huge oil firms. And that's not something that you really see growing up in England, especially in the Nigerian community, which is more of an underclass. So it's below working class, probably, the Nigerian community. Most people are doing quite menial jobs. A lot of people don't have a stay in the UK, so they have to, you know, almost work in the shadows with other people's names. That was my reality. So whenever I used to see people coming in from Nigeria that had achieved, like, you know, such great, you know, heights in their profession, I always was like so enthusiastic about the day that I could come to Nigeria. And almost as soon as I graduated, actually, I moved to Nigeria because I was excited about the opportunity. I was excited about living in a country where Nigerians owned airlines.
I like that you're telling this story because it now changes the narrative.
Absolutely.
You know, it helps us to see that actually there were people who were looking up to Nigerians. You know, somehow, I had an interview earlier today and the person I was speaking with talked about how we Nigerians tend to look down on ourselves and think that we have to go outside our country to get better living opportunities. Exactly, which is why we keep having the current incidences we're having of people being sold into slave trade, because everybody's trying their best to get out of the country one way or the other. Let's talk about your medical practice. How many years have you been into practice? Or did you immediately you were done with medical school, you didn't practice at all in the UK? You came back to Nigeria?
I had to finish my initial training to get my certificate. And then, yeah, I moved.
So how long have you been practicing medicine for now?
I've been a doctor for nearly 10 years now.
Oh, fantastic. Now, let's get to the big one. What motivated you to go into ambulance services, knowing it's capital intensive and no one had done it before? You're a pioneer in this space.
Well, the initial incident was in my early years in medical school, where my sister was here on holiday, my youngest sister, and we wanted to transport her to a better hospital, not necessarily in England, but just anywhere to a better hospital. She was very unstable and critical. So we came up with the idea of just finding an air ambulance, and we couldn't find one in Nigeria. So we looked in Ghana, Sierra Leone, and I was like, how can there are probably about 50 air ambulance services in England alone, which is the size of what, maybe Sokoto and Kano in terms of land mass put together. But we couldn't, the closest
entire
one,
West African sub-region.
Yeah, the only one that we could find was in South Africa, and by the time we had done all the arrangements and things, she had died. And I said, you know, that it was really upsetting to me on two fronts. It was really upsetting to me, obviously, the pain of losing my sister. We're a very close-knit family. We're 3 girls, so we always were sticking. We had to, we stick together, and we had always been best friends as well. And we're a very close-knit family. So even if you see, we went to a wedding over the weekend, it's me and my cousins that always sit together. We don't really have so many friends outside the family. So it was a huge loss for me. It was a huge loss for my really close cousins as well. So there was a sense of loss, but there was also a wider sense of loss for Nigeria and West Africa. How do we access care? Why is there such a big gap between what I see every day in England and what is going on in Africa? And, you know, how can I think about bridging this gap, and what skills do I have that could make it a reality? And
that was how you started flying doctors. Now let's talk about your skill. Do you fly yourself? You fly?
I don't do any of that myself. Okay. So a lot of people think that running a company is really about giving injections, or running an air ambulance company is about giving injections, going around flying aircrafts, but I don't do any of that. I'm a business person, so my day-to-day activities are centered around finance, really, finding clients, speaking to clients, making sure our clients are happy, and making sure that we're making money, making sure the company is sustainable, and making sure that the strategy is right and we're making the right impact. So I have people that fly for me.
So you don't have to be, you're not on the field, you just
I have lots of people that fly for me. I have lots of people that do the medicine, and that's been the case for many, many years now. I've never been actively involved in the field. My role is to make sure that we become the biggest air ambulance company in the world.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Olam, starting a business in Nigeria that no one has ever done before must be quite daunting. What were some of the challenges you faced, and do you work in collaboration with other airlines?
So I think one of the biggest problems of starting a business in Nigeria is probably access to capital. And I think that there's a middle-class narrative that has overtaken the access to capital conversation. So when you hear a lot of young entrepreneurs, sort of 35 and under, talk about starting a business, they're like, oh, you have to go to, you have to go to your friends and family. That's what I did. That's my story. But, you know, going to friends and family for funding really depends on the caliber of friends and family that you have in the first place. You know, if you can go and meet Uncle Dangote for money, then, you know, that's a different caliber of friends and family. But that's not the story of the average Nigerian. So I spent a lot of time trying to look for capital and trying to look for a model that worked for me. So that was definitely a major hurdle. And then young people starting businesses also may have more vision than their older contemporaries, but definitely don't have the experience. And I think young people have to work much harder if you've never had a corporate job before, to get the experience, to learn how to lead, to learn how to manage people, to learn how to grow a business, to learn those things that come to older people quite naturally. But I think that also we should be careful because I always tell my parents that their generation has been hijacked, so that they never led. You know, that generation, our parents' generation, they've actually never led Nigeria. They were always being told, wait your turn, you guys are too young. Oh, yes. And now they're old. And, you know, so I think we should get started early. Get started early, don't be afraid, but know that it's going to be a lot of hard work. And when I first came, I concentrated on cultivating friendships as well and making sure that I had good mentorship networks, people that I could run to, people that had experience. And I cut a lot of things out of my life as well. So I think that most people
What are some of the things you cut out?
Oh my gosh, you think I'm so weird. But I don't watch television, for instance. So
Interested.
I don't listen to any music. I read books a lot. I read a lot of business books. I don't watch any TV. And I don't speak to people that don't want to talk about progress. I don't have those conversations. You'd hardly ever find me like at a friend's house having a conversation about, you know, who did what where. I really, really don't have those conversations at all. I cut those completely out of my life. I don't attend weddings. I don't attend events unless it's a very close friend or family, or there's a business reason for doing that. Whereas I feel that most people waste their 20s
that's a lot.
doing a lot of things that don't really, not necessarily irrelevant things. But if you have, and they're really, really good experiences, but if you have a really strong vision of, you know, building and growing a great company in your 20s, you don't have the skills to do that. And you need to spend a huge proportion of your time, much more than a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old would need, developing those skills and developing relationships with mentors that can guide you when you're going wrong and quickly course correct.
There's so much we will like to find out from Dr. Olamide Orekunrin. We're going on a very quick break. When we return, we'll still be speaking with her. She is indeed a well of knowledge. We can't wait to prod even further. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Hello Nigeria. We're still speaking with Dr. Olamide Orekunrin, who is the Managing Director of Flying Doctors Nigeria, a company that is dedicated to bringing help to the remote parts of West Africa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You've spoken so extensively about your progress. Before we went on the break, you talked about how you cut off some things from your life. You cut out TV, you cut out music, you've invested your time in reading lots of books. What would you say have been some of the lessons that you've learned? We know you're young. We know that you graduated at 21. You're like the youngest doctor, one of the youngest doctors in the UK. And you're still very young, and you're a boss in your own right. You have people who you have to control. You have to learn how to manage your emotions. What would you say have been the greatest lessons you've learned as a boss for people who are hoping to start out business at a very young age?
I think the first lesson I alluded to, that if you want to start in your 20s as opposed to in your 30s and 40s, where you may have gotten more opportunities to learn from others and more corporate experience, then you have to work a bit harder to develop your skills. And I definitely had to work very, very hard to develop my business skills, because everything is theory and you're practicing it as you're learning it. So it's a lot more difficult to do. So you really, really need to spend your 20s a lot more seriously than you see other people spending their 20s that aren't, that perhaps don't have the same goals as you or don't have the same vision as you. And beware of the people that don't have the same vision and goals of you, and try to hang out with the people that do. And then the second thing I think I learned is the value of having good mentors. And I think that this is especially important for women. I think sometimes women mistake somebody being nice to them for somebody mentoring them. So I was speaking to one of my cousins, and she was saying, oh, you know, I really hate having this new female boss because she works me so hard, and maybe she's jealous, and maybe she's angry, and maybe she's bitter because she's single. I'm like, but you had a male boss for 5 years, and he was really nice to you, but he never promoted you. You know, you're still on the same salary that you were 5 years ago. Perhaps you should give this lady a chance, because she seems to be pushing you to a level of excellence where you might be able to get a promotion. So I've always, in my experience, I've always felt that men have difficulty mentoring women. I feel that it's very difficult for a guy to call a woman and say that you're not dressed seriously enough for this meeting. Your makeup isn't right, your hair isn't right, you're not eluding the right executive presence. They can't talk to you anyhow, like a woman will, and really correct you and really say, look, what you're doing is silly. Whereas a woman will, and those are the things that help progress, because they do it to other men. A man will call a man and say, guy, this your suit isn't right, this your trouser is not, you can't go to the meeting like this. And those things, small things, your image, the way you speak, the way you portray your ideas, the way you present, the way that you communicate, are those initial impressions that people, especially investors in businesses, banks, and clients, look at and see if they want to do business with you. So the quality of advice and mentorship that you're getting is very important. And don't pick mentors based on people that are nice to you. Pick mentors on people that tell you the truth.
And reality.
And and are realistic. And I think that balance is for men and for women. And I think the third lesson that I've learned, so skills, mentorship, as a manager of people, is that people are really everything. You know, I shudder when I hear all these like companies that haven't paid salaries for like 6 months. Sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes they're not making any money. But I think that you should pay people before you pay yourself and make sure that your people are happy. Like my dream has never been to make $1 million. I made $1 million a long time ago. My dream is to be able to pay somebody $1 million because then I know that I have a sustainable company. I mean, there's companies like Google, Facebook that pay people $10 million a year. If I can give that kind of salary to somebody, then I know that I've really, really made it in life because that means that the company is sustaining itself. I've created a company that can add a massive amount of value. So yeah, people are everything. And your success is not necessarily judged by how much money you have in your account, but by how much money that you're able to add, or how much value that you're able to add to other people. So those are my three lessons.
Fantastic. Now there's a Nigerian dream, and you seem to have fulfilled and lived that Nigerian dream. You looked inwards and you saw problems, and you created opportunities, and you took care of those problems. Were there stumbling blocks along the line? What were some of the challenges you faced on your journey?
Okay, so I probably would say, number one, I guess not having the right people around me. So in your 20s, everybody wants to have fun. Everybody wants to go out. And you look like the odd one out if you're not going to that wedding, you're not buying that Aso-ebi, you're not spending. So even when I graduated, for example, everybody was buying a new car, everybody was moving into a new apartment. But I really had a dream of setting up a big company. And I knew that my uncle was not Dangote. So I needed to save a lot of money because most business capital actually comes from personal funds. So instead of using my salary to do all the things that other people were doing, I had to, like, during my research year, I had to, like, move into, like, a room with, like, 8 people. And they were not all English speaking. So sometimes, even using the bathroom, I could wake up and wait an hour to, like, shower. While everybody, like, had new cars, I would try and walk to work.
Sacrifices.
Yeah, walk to work some of the time so I could save the money that I would have spent on the train and put it towards my business. So I think one of the major challenges for me was some of the sacrifices that I had to make when you're working towards something and people around you don't necessarily understand that. And I think that alludes to the last thing I said about being around the right people. But sometimes the right people can be hard to find. So I think that's the first challenge. The second challenge was managing myself. So if you look at my interviews from years ago, I'd always say, oh, you know, it's the government, it's, you know, it's people that are not supportive, it's the banks, you know. But now I realize that the better I've become at managing myself, the better that all those factors come into line for me. So immediately you have a reliable business and you have the discipline not to spend all the money that you're making. You're taking it to the bank sees that you're responsible. They see that, okay, you've taken this small loan, you're able to pay back. You've taken a little bigger, you're able to pay back. Then the slightly bigger one will not be a problem for them because you've already established a relationship of trust. So a lot of the factors that I thought were working against me and a lot of the excuses that I used to make for myself before, I've realized probably were like a lack of self-discipline on my part. And the better I got at managing myself, at being very disciplined with myself, by making sure that I stuck to a routine, by making sure that I was making the right sacrifices, building the right relationships, the easier it became for me to see that most things I have some control over in some way, shape, or form. There's something that I can change about myself. And it's easier, actually, for me to change myself than for me to change the world.
Very true indeed.
And then the third challenge, I would say probably still the biggest cultural difference I've noticed moving to Nigeria, and I lived in Japan before this, is sort of the dual challenge of being young and being a woman. So young people really, it's the same attitude, you know, wait your turn, you're too young to do this, or, you know, you just need turn by turn, that kind of issue. But really, if you remember the generation 2 years before us, they were actually super, super ambitious. Buhari was in Aso Rock at 39, the first time round.
Yes.
So that means that by 30, you know, I know 39-year-olds that are still hustling to be, you know, some junior civil servants, business card holder.
You're very right about that. There was a governor at 25.
Yeah, there were governors at 25. That generation was super, super ambitious, super, super driven. And we can't be told to wait our turn because they didn't wait their turns. They were strong, they were ambitious, they were driven, they were smart. And I think that we need to emulate some of that, actually.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you've spoken so much about mentorship and how people are everything and how women should be mentored by women. And more importantly, no, not necessarily, but like you think it's easier for women to mentor women.
I think it's easier, definitely.
And more importantly, looking at a person who's going in the same direction you're going. What are some of the tips you would give to people who are seeking mentors? Because there's some people who say, I want this person to mentor me. I don't know how to go about it. I don't know how to, do I need to send her an email? Breaking it down, how do you go about approaching someone for mentorship and sustaining a relationship in such a way that you don't seem like you're being such a bog, or and also not being too distant from the person? So how do you strike that balance?
Mentorship is a very hard thing because people think that a mentorship relationship is about taking. This person is going to give me advice. This person is going to give me money. This person is going to give me support. This person is going to introduce me to the government. It's not necessary. That's a wrong perception. Mentorship actually is a giving relationship. So instead of cracking your brains of how to email the person, how to contact the person, I always crack my brains of what does this person need? What is really troubling this person? What can I get for the person? What does the person say that they like, they want? Because even the richest people in Nigeria, don't worry, they have issues, right? Yeah. They have things that they need, they have problems that they need solving, they have services that can be offered for free. So don't crack your brain on how you can get something from the person, first of all. Start thinking of how you can give something to the person, and it might take a while. The caliber of mentors I had like 7 years ago is not the same as now, but obviously through my journey through business, through doing different air ambulance transfers, through doing different transactions outside my main business, I've been able to meet people. So the type of mentors has gotten better over time, and you don't always necessarily need a physical mentor. So there was a time that I didn't know any successful people. Like, I just didn't. The most successful person I knew was, you know, somebody in my church, that was an old guy in my church that had probably practiced medicine and retired 30 years ago. That was probably like the richest person I knew. There was another person, a lady, who was in my school, and that lady was like, she was like a goddess to me because she noticed that while we're always like looking scruffy at school because we didn't have like good clothes. So she was the one that used to bring like her children's clothes to us so that we could wear them. And she always used to warn her children that don't laugh at them in the class because they're wearing your old clothes. So they never, it was just a secret between my kids and me and my sister and their kids, that we would never say that those new clothes were actually from them. So she was like probably the most successful person I knew. And she was a good mentor to me when I was when I was applying to medical school. She read through my personal statement and now she's on my board. So from that childhood relationship, I'm not even I'm not even friends with her kids, but I'm friends with her. So you might not know anybody that is that successful at the beginning. And I relied heavily on books at that time. So I feel like Steve Jobs mentored me because I've read so much about him.
So you can do distant mentorship.
Yeah, I feel like Dangote is my mentor, even though we're not friends. Because I have his picture on my wall. It's the only painting I have in my house, legitimately. And I feel like he's a role model. I watch all his interviews. I'm a Dangote obsessive. So I feel like he's a mentor to me as well. So you can have mentors without necessarily knowing them physically. And definitely for the average person, you're probably not going to know them directly until you get to a certain level in business anyway.
All right. Before we let you go, we have run out of time very quickly. Flying Doctors is a charity organization.
It's a business organization.
It's a business organization. Yeah. Okay. So now, how can people follow you up on social media if people want to get to know much about you and what you do? What are your social media handles?
Okay, so the Flying Doctors is an air ambulance service, and what we do is we do medical transfer by plane from one area to the next. Okay. My Twitter handle is at Niger Flying Doctors, so it's very easy.
Doctors on Twitter and on Instagram.
I don't have an Instagram because I don't take enough pictures.
That's how we get to know. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. It's been really good talking to you.
All right, we'll leave you in the hands of another amazing woman who's done something beautiful for music, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa. Her name is Angelique Kidjo.
To enjoy more of these our Ogbonge videos when you just watch, press this button to subscribe on top of our YouTube page. You go love her.